Better than it was 2 years ago, not nearly as clean or as safe as we'd like it.
Portland City Commissioner and mayoral candidate Rene Gonzalez sees Portland as a work in progress, especially when it comes to homelessness.
We've spent about $13 million as a city cleaning up homeless camps in the city of Portland. Sometimes it feels like whack-a-mole, but it is creating some positive environments in certain parts of the city. Secondly, we banned outdoor drug use in the city of Portland. I led that charge, and the state has recently taken that up at the state legislative level and now essentially reversed Measure 110. Overall, that's sending a message that we don't want this drug use in our city. We still see way too much of it on our streets, but every time we take a stand, it's positively impacting the environment.
So if elected, will people still be sleeping on the sidewalks?
You know, I think for the last 20 years, we've had folks running for mayor promise to end homelessness. I think in every election cycle, we'll hear someone promise to end unsheltered camping. I'm not going to promise that that's going to disappear. It has been with us for as long as the city of Portland has existed, and but it used to be much better than it is today. I will commit to return Portland to one of the cleanest, safest cities in America, and that means taking sometimes hard positions on unsanctioned camping, but never abandoning compassion.
Will you support camp removals without adequate shelter?
Yes.
Why?
One, I don't think it's either or. We're going to continue to invest in shelter.
Many people argue that your response to homelessness is too harsh. One example is calling for Portland Street Response to stop handing out tents. How do you plan, without adequate shelter, to make change in this crisis in a humane way?
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing is some really debilitating drug use and self-destructive behavior in certain segments of our unsheltered population. We cannot continue to feed that beast. It wasn't just tents and tarps. They stopped the distribution of drug kits.
So if elected, you'll continue to call for no more handing out tents and tarps?
Absolutely not, except for potentially in sanctioned camping sites. The broad handing out of tents and tarps by the city and county, absolutely not.
So the city can only do so much when it comes to, say, handing out tents and tarps or not doing so. How will you approach the relationship with the county? What will you do differently to fix what has been somewhat of a rocky relationship thus far?
I mean, I will say there have been shifts at the county level. They're emphasizing to a much greater extent shelter than they were a year ago. You know, it was all about housing first in the Joint Office on Homelessness. You've seen some shifts even in how they define housing first now and their willingness to support shelter. I think that's because the city increasingly had a stern voice on that, and we didn't back down. We didn't get guilted into wanting to alleviate on the street while we're all fighting for long-term housing for folks. So I think, you know, I'm proud of what I've contributed to the shift in tone from the city. The bottom line, we send $35+ million to the Joint Office on Homeless every year. I will not support continuing to send dollars there unless we see real improvements in shelter being brought online, unless we see support for Portland Street Response and for some of our other houseless outreach that the city has to pay for directly. Though we should be getting financial support from that from the Joint Office on Homelessness.
So you think the county's been enabling some of this crisis?
Yes, and I think a lot of well-intentioned nonprofits have as well.
I mean, they oversee some 200 nonprofits. How will you be the one to change the way they hold those nonprofits accountable?
We're already seeing progress in the proposed new IGA in terms of, first of all, just talking about metrics. What are your actual outcomes, and are you actually going to report on how many people you're getting into shelter, or how many people in a shelter are getting into supportive housing? We have seen positive shifts in the county in the last year based on the demands from the city and frankly from the public as a whole. So I think we continue down that path, but they're not going to have our money from the city if they're not going to support the programs we're doing in direct outreach.
So let's talk about some of those programs that they help you out with, like the task sites or the Safe for Us villages. Will you continue to support those programs if elected?
Yes, I think they've shown some real progress.
If you're calling for the city to stop funding the Joint Office, how do you expect the county to then continue funding the city's sheltering programs?
Well, we would stop funding if they are engaging in enabling behaviors and don't send dollars back on our city programs. Having said that, they're well supported by Metro in the supportive housing bonds, and they are struggling to get those dollars out the door. So I'm not sure they really need the city money, frankly. This is no longer a place where nonprofits and governmental entities are giving people a means to really engage in damaging behavior.
So the people who choose to live outside and say no to shelter, do you see that as a city responsibility to deal with them or a county responsibility?
I think we are law enforcement. We are first responders. So when it comes to having someone in front of your house that you don't want there anymore, there's only one government that's going to respond. That's the city. And frankly, we'd like there to be outreach workers who can get that person to move. But if they refuse to move, it's the police department that's going to be responsible ultimately for that piece. But long term, for people to rebuild their lives, that's largely a county and state responsibility in terms of behavioral health. It's very, very important the next mayor is committed to restoring the commons and isn't afraid to say that.
Blair's with me now. Super interesting story. What's this commons thing he's talking about?
It's really funny you bring that up because I actually thought the same thing. I think what he's referring to is like common areas downtown Portland. It's just his way of saying that, I guess.
All right. And then the millions that he's talking about, possibly if he's mayor, withholding from the joint office. I'm a little confused on that because it seems like if he gives that money to the joint office, he wants to make sure the joint office reinvests that back in the city shelters. And if he doesn't give it to the joint office, he's probably going to have to reinvest it in the city shelters himself. So what is the deal?
Right. I also want to point out this is not the first time we've heard this argument asking the city to stop funding the Joint Office of Homeless Services. And for people who don't know, that's the county and city-led program that manages all the funding meant for homelessness in Portland. So yes, to your point, if the city withholds that funding, sure, maybe it'll go into the city sheltering programs. But I would argue it's not enough. They need long-term funding. I mean, for example, what we're seeing at the temporary alternative shelter site in Southeast Portland, they have a bunch of people in there, a bunch of people ready for housing, but the city is currently asking the county for more money for rental assistance for those people ready for their own apartment, but they need long-term funding solutions for these projects to work.
Wow, it is such an expensive problem.
It really is, yeah.
Okay, so you've been on the streets for 2 years doing homeless stories, and you've interviewed a lot of the leading politicians now running for mayor. What did you think about Gonzalez? Are his plans, are his ideas realistic?
I think they are, and I only say that because of what I've seen. Like you said, 2 years, 5 days a week pretty much. I talk with homeless people, I talk with people addicted to drugs, and I hear their stories, and I can tell you it's not a black and white blanket solution. And so, you know, hearing from other people running for mayor and hearing we're going to end homelessness in a year or cut it in half in a year's time, ambitious, yes. Realistic, I'm not quite sure. So
You're not going to bet again.
I feel
not going to bet on that.
Right. I feel like Gonzalez is realistic in what can and cannot be done, even though some people, I will say, you know, believe his policies are too harsh and lack compassion, and I can also see that as well.
Yeah, I noticed he did sort of dodge that one question about how are you going to compassionately do this?
Yeah, and I made sure to ask him that because I was curious, and I'm not sure I got a straight answer.
Yeah, well, I'm sure he feels as compassionate, but yeah, you're right, he didn't answer the question. All right, thank you, Blair. Great stuff as always. So now it's your turn. What do you think about what Commissioner Gonzalez had to say? Anything surprise you? Let us know, will you? Send us an email. The address is thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail 503-226-5090.